W. Road, a band of New Mexico Japanese Americans heading into the small town of Lordsburg. It is October 2018, and we have traveled 225 miles from Albuquerque to see the fruits of our labor, a traveling exhibit on the World War II Japanese American prison camps of New Mexico, Confinement in the Land of Enchantment.
That moment in time, these elementary school kids knew a lot more than I did, and probably a lot of adults in New Mexico did, about the Santa Fe internment camp. So it's not an issue of age, it's a matter of access. And that's what these kids had, and that's why they were able to do what they did. Questions like that kind of get you to think about what you know in a different way, and it doesn't necessarily give you an answer. Like, what's more important during wartime, freedom or security? What are the responsibilities of individuals to uphold the rights of others?
Unlike the Japanese immigrant men who were rounded up by the FBI in the days immediately following the attack on Pearl Harbor, we on the West Coast were not incarcerated until after the signing of Executive Order 9066 by President Franklin Roosevelt on February 19, 1942.
This is where all the men were marched from the Omar siding where we were a while ago, and then down this road they turn left and go into the campsite. But when those guys got here and they took a look at them, they were average ages of 55, like from 50 to 80. It was hard to see any kind of threat in them.
They represented community leaders, anywhere from ministers, school teachers, prominent business people.
Now there was great fear because we had so many men that were in the Bataan Death March. Stories were coming back about the cruelties there. This was the enemy. Mary Louise Morgan said, well, we felt sorry for them because they didn't have anything, just what they could carry in a suitcase. And I'm Italian, she said, and if the Italians act up, I might have been taken. So they felt sorry for them.
On July 27, 1942, two newly arrived Issei men were shot and killed by a guard during a 2-mile march from the railroad siding to the Lordsburg prison camp.
Up this concrete abutment and rested. And then up this way, according to Burleson, they could speak English because they asked to relieve themselves, and they did. But later on, this particular one left the road again to go toward the fence, maybe to relieve himself again, is my theory. And Burleson called out halt 3 times as he was instructed, and they did not, so he shot them in the back going toward this telephone pole.
exhibit has developed since you've been on this 2-year journey since the exhibit first received funding, and just describe a little bit to us, what's here and what you have planned potentially in the future as well.
Started with this very modest grant from the JACL program, Japanese American Confinement Sites program. So we got a modest planning grant, and we started sort of looking at what we might do to document and celebrate or memorialize the camps in New Mexico. And at that stage, we decided that we wanted to do a publication, we wanted to do historic markers, we wanted to do a website, and we wanted to do a traveling exhibit.
Couple screws in the back. Is that the last one? Sweet. Good, good. Just continue. Hey, pleasure to meet you. Thank you. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you. I'm glad.
Great.
Yeah, it was our student who built the walls.
Wow.
Okay.
Shoot, chef. Safely with a knife.
One for half panel on the side. That's what I wanted to do as an assistant to do that. Line them on the walls to do. And then keeping the order is the landscape, one per right. And then we got 4 different and what the main, I guess, is to look at those. First one we come to is our intro, and you see it's got our banner on it. It's got information about the CLOE project. See what those posters say? CLOE project, da-da-da. And that wall is
Hi, I'm Aiko Allen, New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League Board of Directors member. And we're here this morning for the opening of the Confinement in the Land of Enchantment exhibit. I have with us Gail Okawa, who is a professor of English, as well as an incredible storyteller, and so a person who's provided a lot of good information on internment. I understand this is the first time that you've seen the exhibit.
Yes.
And so we're interested in your reflection, the way your grandfather's story is tied in to the exhibit, as well as the stories of other people that you've been able to interview, both folks who were in the camp as well as those who were outside of the barbed wire.
In terms of my grandfather's experience, he was first taken from Hawaii to Angel Island, then to Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio. That was just sort of an intermediate stop, I should say, because it was interrupted after 10 days. And they were sent then to Lordsburg. Lordsburg was the first long-term internment camp. Eventually, in June 1943, they were sent to Santa Fe. There were 10 transfer boats from Hawaii, and he was in the 3rd one. So these people sort of stayed together. The government shipped them over and then kept them pretty much together in the internment camps. I think, every one of us has to play a small part in kind of perpetuating the story or stories. And I'm so glad that the project has been really paying attention to these sort of lesser known and lesser experienced camps. The most important thing is for people to be able to be exposed to it. There's so many stories that come out of these camps, both from the internees themselves and the guards. So I think at the same time that we see the injustice and the oppression and, the negative things, we need to understand how the internees themselves were very dignified human beings who had integrity and used that integrity to move forward in their lives, so that the their spirit would not be broken. They adapted by keeping busy. They had a term, or one of the terms that I encountered was barbed wire disease, and they tried to do whatever they could to combat barbed wire disease, which is, I think, boredom, malaise, that feeling of helplessness, feeling that they somehow could not, had no control, and that others had total control over them. So they took as much as they could from their own spirit and tried to be creative, and physically creative and intellectually creative. So they they also were active. They participated in sports, sumo, baseball, golf, tennis. They took classes. They learned things. They kept their minds active. Participated in no chanting societies and the theater and all of these things, and in order to keep their spirits alive. Then on the night of his arrest, he put one of these librettos in his pocket, just a small book, and carried it all the way to the internment camps with him. And so these men like him, and including my grandfather, participated in these societies, these chanting societies, and they would get together. And what I thought was so interesting is that I was interested in this. In the 70s, I actually studied theater. This is before knowing anything about my grandfather. It was such a strange experience to come face to face with that as an experience of the men in the camps, and I could hear them as they would sit. I mean, there were sketches of them sitting, and I knew how they would be sitting because I had studied it, and I could hear them chanting. And the wonderful thing about that experience for me was that I could imagine them, these individual voices, coming together in this sort of very, very unified voice, and it was to me, it sort of was a metaphor for how they worked together to survive. And I could hear it. I mean, this is something I can hear even now, what it must have sounded like. There's so much that came out of the camps, and yet there are many things that have been lost because families don't know the value of them. And so I think the more we have these kinds of exhibitions and storytelling and participation with the community, the more people will understand what they do have. I'm talking about the families, and hopefully there will be more preserved. If we can preserve materials, we can piece things together. This helps us to understand not only our personal history, but how our ethnic history fits into the larger American story, and how it also interfaces with other ethnic groups.
The way we have bits and pieces of information, that you have one photograph that's multiplied by 10, that's multiplied by another 10 stories, and we continue this work so that we know how we live on, that we're not forgotten what's happening for us in policy. It seems so significant that we make change story by story.
Yes. Those kinds of things stay with people. And when you hear stories about that, they stay with you, and they can, you never know how things are going to change people's lives.
As a kid, I remember sitting on the barracks of Block 44, opening packages stamped enemy alien mail from my father's canteen in his prison camp in Santa Fe. There were treasures, Tootsie Rolls and Juicy Fruit chewing gum and Black Hawk comics, but also Pueblo pottery and beaded jewelry and brightly painted wooden toys. I thought New Mexico was a magical place. And now, all these years later, I still do. Because now I delve into the magic and the mysteries of the stories of Lordsburg, Santa Fe, Fort Stanton, prison camps, but also the small Japanese American communities that dotted the map of New Mexico long before World War II.
Yet we must recognize that the internment of Japanese Americans was just that, a mistake. For throughout the war, Japanese Americans in the tens of thousands remained utterly loyal to the United States. Indeed, scores of Japanese Americans volunteered for our armed forces, many stepping forward in the internment camps themselves. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, made up entirely of Japanese Americans, served with immense distinction to defend this nation, their nation. Yet back at home, the soldiers' families were being denied the very freedom for which so many of the soldiers themselves were laying down their lives. The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors, surviving Japanese Americans, of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked of the Empire of Japan.
On the ways, that was where the raw sewage flowed over there. You could always, when the wind was blowing right, you could smell it. They got a lot of stuff. There used to be like a holding pond with sewage. Oh, it smelled. You know, us kids used to go across and go down the road and across the way because there are 2 apple trees, green apples. So whenever it was ready in the fall, we'd go out and then we'd get tummy ache.
I go back to that night when everybody had to leave, and I wonder about the drive in the car. You know, kids look out the window. I know they sleep when they're on vacation, but this wasn't a vacation.
Yeah. It was frightening because, for one thing, we didn't know where we were going, right? And the other thing is seeing my older brother and sister throwing stuff into the trunk of the car, not knowing what are they doing, only what they can carry. You mean that January, yeah.
Cold outside.
It was cold and it was close to midnight, if I recollect. I didn't know the time.
Did y'all keep the dog outside? Like, was that your warning sign that somebody was coming? Did he start barking?
Yeah.
And let you know?
Well, that was before.
Yeah.
That was December 9th, I think, yeah. But, you know, that night when the vigilante group was coming the immigration authorities told my sister Kathy, Mary, my younger brother Bill, and I, all four of you guys get in the back seat of the sedan. So there was no safety guards at that time. So we were grabbing each other and crying, and I always remember we just cried and cried and cried, and I don't know how we fell asleep.
Cried yourself to sleep.
Yeah. When we woke up, my father, I think, was the one next to the immigration authority was driving. He said, "Oh my gosh, there's mountains," and we woke up and we could barely see the glimmer of light in the background. You could see the mountain.
Did you think you were still in New Mexico?
No, we had no idea.
You'd never seen mountains, huh?
We had never seen mountains ever. That was so exciting because my dad was excited. But all of a sudden we forgot where we were going, what we were going to do. It was the sight of a faint sight of mountains.
The snow cap on the top, probably.
Well, later we saw that later, but it was an exciting moment. So, but when we came to Fort Stanton, we never got past the gate because my sister said, "Wait a minute, boy." When she jumped out of the car, she said, whoever it was, the authority, "Wait a minute, you're gonna stick us in there, over there with those people? They are all men and they're gonna," no, they said, "No, we got you separated out on the right side." I think I remember some right side over down the road. My sister said, "I don't care. They're gonna attack and molest the women and all that." And she said, "We are not going in there." She said, "We have a fundamental rights guaranteed by the Constitution."
They didn't know what to think.
They didn't know what to say. They were dumbfounded. They looked at each other. I remember very well that look. You know, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, she and Lil Kimura realized they had to take charge.
They had to grow up.
They really knew that they had no options left, that they had to make the decisions because the parents lost their authoritarian rights. You know, they were now considered enemies. They were the aliens, quote, they were the aliens, so they no longer could be the spokespersons for the family. And so the oldest two were my sister Amy and Lil Kimura with her big family with siblings, and so they knew that they had no choice, and so they had to make the right decisions, ask the right questions.
It couldn't be children anymore. They
were no longer children. Yeah, I would say that. I'll never forget that when we were in Topaz. We weren't even there 2 or 3 months. She started raising a commotion by saying that, "I'm going to walk out of here." Well, she first went to the authorities, the War Relocation Authorities, WRA, went to their administrative office and said straight out, "You have no right to keep us in here." And she said, "I'm going to walk out." They said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. You're going to be killed." My sister said, "That's fine. The world will understand why I'm threatening to walk out." Here's a girl not quite 18 saying that.
Just a teenager. She was a child.
She was 18 then.
Still a child, though.
Yeah. So we sort of adjusted, but my parents and my older brothers and sisters said, "Don't ever talk about where we came from. Don't ever talk about anything in the past. If kids ask, just shrug your shoulder, don't say." And that's how we went through grade school, through high school.
Sounds like how World War II.
Yeah, we never talked about it.
Yeah.
It's ironic in a way, but I said, "Aiko, when were you first asked about internment in a camp?" She said, "About the same time you were, about 30 to 40 years after we graduated at a high school reunion. They started hearing about it back in the, no, it was about in the 1970s. I think we were maybe 15 years out of high school, and they said, "How come you never told us about that?" Because that all started coming out in both school textbooks and all that. The government finally allowed American people to know that Japanese
happened.
Americans were interred in these camps. So we said, you guys never asked us, so why would we tell you? But we survived. We all survived, thank goodness. Yeah, I've been back here about 4 times.
Oh, 4
yeah,
times?
4 times. Yeah.
It was all kind of an organic kind of thing that just came together, and man, I tell you what, I have made, since that happened, I've made more great friendships out of
You also made enemies too.
You know, yeah, a little bit. But
Yeah.
to me, it's more important. You know, you look at today's time and what we're going through right now, currently in this
Yes.
country. It just blows my mind. It's almost like people forgot. And Mayor Lansford, he actually, in a kind of roundabout way, he actually helped a lot of this happen. You know, and I can't thank him enough. You know, as far as him having a heart and
adored
seeing
her.
what
We
what
became
really
best
happened.
of friends. And his mother said one day, I came to school and she wasn't there, and she was never there thereafter. And I would come home and cry to my mother that I missed Kathy. See, he said, do you know who that Kathy is? Yes, that's my older sister.
Yeah.
That I think that also convinced him that there needs to be an apology to the Clovis thing. As you know, as my brother always questioned, will we ever be welcome home, you know, with that letter you read. And, you know, that was very important to us, that now it gave us respect for the community that we grew up in, you know.
Somebody had mentioned that that was the first time in the history of the United States that a community had formally apologized and
Absolutely.
and went out and extended an olive branch, if you will, to the citizens that it had affected.
And you know, that's why I came out, because I didn't ever expect any community or even a mayor and commissioners to ever apologize what went on. As the great philosopher Santa Anna said, if you choose to ignore history, history will repeat itself.
I've learned a lot. That's another crazy part. I've learned so much about people always ask me, well, you're Hispanic, so why should you care? And that I don't know why they ask that. In my own mind, I guess it just pisses me off, because why shouldn't I care?
Yeah, it doesn't matter who you are. If you care, you're going to go out.
Yeah.
Yeah. To do what's right the wrongs.
Yeah.
That's important, really.
Well, Dr. Ibarra, after today's events, what do you think about your experiences back in New Mexico regarding the CLOE project?
Everything was done real well. They compacted everything the way I would expect them to do, meaning that nothing was left for doubt. Especially, I like this, that they covered this area quite well. You know, I'm just tickled pink that you guys left something for history. I was surprised that good questions, a lot of very interested people today. Yeah, I thought it went well, and I think you got people who were truly interested, not just wanting to listen to any old talk. I think they did. They were truly interested in what happened to Japanese Americans. So.
Yeah, and they had really good questions too.
Yeah, they sure did. I was tickled pink too.
Well, Dr. Roy, matter of fact, I'm gonna give you a hug. No handshakes around here. Hug.
That's my buddy. He didn't just turn out a paper for college work, but he truly committed himself to understanding the things that happened. And I know that because I kept an eye on what he was doing.